Hi everyone, I am joined today by Andrei Martyanov, an expert on Russian military and naval strategy, also former officer in the Soviet Union, who later worked in the US as a director of commercial aerospace. Now, it's great. This is the first time we speak, but I've seen
My
you
pleasure.
dozens
Yeah.
of time. Um, I wanted to start with a big question, which is where are we in the Ukraine war now? I mean, even in Europe, we appear to have retired the "we are winning" narrative. But how do you read what is going on the battlefield at the moment?
Same what is happening for the last 3 years, which is basically physical annihilation of what today is fully NATO army. Ukrainian army, whatever is armed forces of Ukraine, whatever is left of them is completely armed and supplied by NATO, and Russians do what they did for the last 3 years, just kill them. I am sorry to be very blunt, but that's what it is. And basically, that's just, you know, just what is happening. We are in the arrangement phase of the conflict, which of course have been lost by the combined West militarily. It was lost already in 2023. It was just a matter of how West would try to avoid the humiliation and consequences which we observe today. But it is what it is, and by the time there will be some kind of probably arrangement reached between United States and Russia, because these are the two parties at war in this case, there will be no armed forces of Ukraine left. As together with, and I'm sorry to say it, it's blunt, but it is what it is. The remnants of the sperm bank for Ukraine will be also annihilated. And this is in the end, for Russians, it is either us or them, and simple as that. And yes, even in the West, they understood now that they have to retire this narrative, idiotic as it is, that somehow Ukraine is winning and what have you. So yeah, that's the phase we are in. And if you look attentively at the intensity, just for some people to understand the scale of that, and I repeat it ad nauseum, in Kursk Oblast alone, this small, it's not square, it was small area, which was about 159 square miles, which is about the size of the city of New York with boroughs. Ukraine and NATO planners who command and control it, they killed 72,000 Ukrainian troops there. They killed their combined arms army. And this is just small area of Kursk. So, and when you look attentively at what has been done to Ukraine by their primarily Western curators, not that there was no support locally for that, the nation is basically being destroyed. And the country of Ukraine, whatever will be left of it by the end of the whole affair, we'll have to wait and see.
Well, it's said that in the final stages, at least historically, in the final stages of war, is really when you see casualties spike quite dramatically. And I'm wondering if we're reaching a breaking point because the violence appears to, at least the casualties, appears to have intensified. Looking at the videos coming out of Chasiv Yar, Kursk, it's quite gruesome to see the amount of deaths and burned out equipment.
Yeah.
Do you see a breaking point, or how can this continue? This is because it's not just on the battlefield, but you see some growing dissent now within Ukraine. Even Yulia Tymoshenko, which was she was one of the heroes of the West when she went again against Yanukovych back in 2010. But even she's now being very critical when she hears, for example, the head of German intelligence arguing we need to keep the war going for another 5 years to throw more Ukrainians at this so we can arm ourselves. I mean, this is. My point is both militarily and at the societal level. It seems to be something is changing, isn't it?
Well, I mean, don't count on the political change in Ukraine, despite the fact that there are many people who are now just in what used to be Ukraine are afraid There's no doubt about there's a severe security apparatus there. They kill you if you raise any kind of the objections to what is essentially dystopian politics by Kiev regime. But you have to keep in mind, Kiev regime is run from London now. I mean, there are some parts which are, basically controlled by the United States, but United States is desperately looking for the off-ramp because that military humiliation, once it's completely arranged in terms of the facts, post factum, if you wish, it will make Vietnam and Afghanistan look like the chicken feed, so they try to do it. But London, yeah, these people, they are not very bright and they will continue to kill more Ukrainians. Russians will oblige, of course, But I would say that in terms of the spike was in the beginning of the year. It was very high. So now it's kind of somewhat lower itself to around 1,500 a day. But reality is we're already looking at the more than 1.2, it's probably 1.4 by now, million KIAs alone on the Ukrainian side. We're probably looking at around 2 million wounded. There are so many people they deliberately keep them in the missing in action category, not to pay the compensation for the families. And the Ukraine started all this affair in 2022 with roughly slightly under the 40 million people population. Right now, this population is reduced by per Vladimir Putin, Dmitry Medvedev, and people who are way more, better informed about it than me, is around 19 million. So they lost half of the population pretty much. So, and country, especially what it used to be, the Ukraine, it cannot exist anymore just to give you example, today they have the session of Rada, it's also, illegitimate because the term expired sometime last year together with Zelensky tenure as legitimate president. They turning on during session, each 20 minutes, they turn on the national anthem of Ukraine. We are looking at psychiatric issue on the scale of the whole nation or whatever is left of it. And we have to deal with this, and this is the reality. Waiting for some kind of morality from the combined West, especially from London or Berlin, scratch any German, you will have somebody with the Nazi or Wehrmacht past, not going to happen. So Russians will have to kill them all. And I understand it sounds blunt, it sounds absolutely, insensitive, but it is what it is. Those guys, I mean, you have to understand those people in NATO, including the United States, those all lawyers, the political scientists and what have you, they thought that they know what war is. They don't. They never knew. And as a result, we are facing what we have today, the event of the half millennium, historically speaking, and they didn't understand that they were throwing the West, not just Ukraine, at the meat grinder, and they succeeded. And whatever we have, it's all the links of the same chain, including Trump's at some point of time unlikely victory. So this is all the types of things tied specifically as it was the political outcome of the World War II in 1945 to the battlefields of the Eastern Front, if you wish, So it was the Red Army which shaped essentially the outcome globally, although Western historians love to ignore it. And then now we have this situation, and as the result, as I already stated, Russians will kill as many as they will throw, and the military impotence, military industrial impotence of NATO have been exposed completely. And what can I say? I cannot argue with that. It is my thesis, which I'm speaking about for the last 10 plus years.
Yeah, it's said that each generation has to learn how to fear war itself. And I guess it's a key problem with the World War II generation passing away is that generation who learned really to fear war and avoid it, it's truly gone. And we've been replaced with a new generation which doesn't really have that much respect for the horror that it entails. You did mention that the Americans have that they're looking for their off-ramp. And I thought this was interesting because more than 2 years ago, that is in January of 23, the former head of the entire German military of the Bundeswehr, Harald Kujat, the general,
Oh, yeah,
he,
yeah,
he
general, yeah.
yeah, he actually warned that the war, which he argued had been provoked by NATO and the peace sabotaged by the Americans and British, that it had already been lost. And he warned that as the war would be won by Russia, the Americans would eventually pull back, and then the Germans would be left facing a very angry Russia all by itself. It appears that this, I guess, very accurate prediction is coming into fruition. But I wanted to ask you about how much it affects the battlefield that the Americans are looking for this off ramp. Because yes, they were still sending the weapons and providing the intelligence, but as we learned from this recent New York Times article, this hasn't been merely a proxy war. The extent to which the US has directed the entire war from the beginning out of Germany, it's pretty much been a US or a NATO war with Ukrainian soldiers. This is how much should be impacted now that Americans, I guess, are looking to disentangle from this, pending disaster.
The United States doesn't have resources anymore to support it in any meaningful way. The only resource which matters, Russians would love if between, for example, stopping military supplies or whatever United States can provide now and turning off the ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, the Russians would gladly go for the ISR being turned off. The rest of what they will take care of is, well, not easily, but they will take care of it, destroying more and more equipment, whatever is being thrown at them. If you look attentively at the overall losses, this is the largest conflict since World War II on European soil. And it is, as General Kuyat, one of very few Bundeswehr people, because he's an old generation, he learned things properly. He definitely understood the realities of, for example, the Russian or Soviet rather group of the troops in GDR in East Germany and what it could do in the first months of war. So here, that was a professional opinion. The problem is you cannot provide this professional opinion to the types like what we had with Biden administration as shysters, political shysters and ideologues, totally inadequate, uneducated, highly uncultured, such as Sullivan or Blinken. Those people wouldn't understand the first thing about real national security, despite Sullivan being the national security advisor, or about war, especially about war of the 21st century, which is highly technological. And as the result, what many people do not understand, by the very fact that the United States provoked this, which is absolutely correct, United States planned it, and it was in the full command and control from the get-go. Russians knew it. It was the Western public to really begin to recognize that it's essentially American war. But it exposed the amateurish level of operational planning, very template, rigid, very uneducated way of how they view their hostilities. Plus, of course, they were hiding behind the backs of the primarily Ukrainian troops. But this is the best proxy combined West ever had. Just historically, there was never better because essentially by the 24th February 2022, this was the NATO army. Mr. Syrski, for example, he was in charge of bringing the armed forces of Ukraine to NATO standards from 2014. He is essentially the guy who was shaping this to be the NATO army. This NATO army have been defeated. I believe it is the fifth iteration we are facing today, but some people say it's the fourth. So Russians defeated it at least 4 times, wiping out the force which had to be each time there has to be, as Larry Johnson correctly states, in the movie Multiplicity, each following version is weaker and stupider than the previous one. So when people understand the military implications and military side of the war, it is stupefying. And that is why at some point of time, I dropped my corporate unity, so to speak, and I'm saying that American generals are simply incompetent. Pentagon is incompetent, let alone Europeans. They are jokes. Their armies, armed forces are jokes. And I spoke about this widely. I wrote the book my latest book, which is The America's Final War. And when you look at the military results and you begin to look at the numbers, you begin to look at the models and at the dynamics, it is stupefying. I mean, that you look at any American general who ever expressed opinions about this, starting from the acting Supreme Commander of the European Forces of NATO, Mr. Cavoli, and going to the people such as Petraeus or Kin or what have you. Those people have no clue what they're dealing with. It is astonishing. It is downright scary when you look at these people who wouldn't be allowed to command a battalion in Russian armed forces. That's how incompetent they are.
Well, you mentioned the technological shift, the inability to adjust, and I guess it's quite undeniable that Russia's ability to adjust to the battlefield has been very interesting, and but one of the key changes has been the role of of course, the FPV drones, because it's said that artillery has will remain the king of the battlefield for, well, since artillery was invented, but it seems to have been replaced by FPV drones. That is the majority of casualties, which are which is very cheap to produce. It doesn't always need the same infrastructure, training. How do you see this shift in technology impacting the course of the war? Or is it in Russia's favor or NATO's favor? How?
Oh no, Russia, again, let's clear things up from the get-go. You can quote me on that. NATO and United States, they lost the arms race in every critical sector of the warfare of the 21st century. And in terms of FPV and artillery, no, artillery remains and will remain the main firepower, which provides the 80% of the casualties. FPV drones are really good, of course, at fighting the armor, which is unprotected armor, and hunting things in, even as Russians demonstrated, in the fairly severe electronic warfare environment. So that's when the optical cables came in use. It's very difficult to jam them. But the point is, as any dichotomy, the sword and the shield, same thing gonna happen with, already is happening with the FPV drones. Guess what? Russians already serially produced the anti-drone drones, So you have this, fight there. Obviously, they have an impact on the battlefield, but classic use of the long-range fires remain unchanged and will remain unchanged, with FPV drones merely drone warfare organically evolving as it was supposed to be. Don't forget, Soviet army was using drones for intelligence purposes. They were obviously mini missiles, not mini really, they were pretty big. If you look at the race class of the drones, they were jet powered. They were essentially little jets, and they would fly with the very high speed. And of course, they were not as controllable as you would do it, but they have been around. They just merely evolved. And because you can 3D print them, this is one of the items which United States and Europe provides Ukrainians with the 3D printers. Yeah, you can saturate them at some point of time, but as I already stated, even there, if you look attentively at the lines of communication, supply lines to the line of the combat contact on the Russian side, you will see yourself, it's all covered in nets. You just literally have the roads which you drive, and it's all covered with the anti-drone nets, and it reduces dramatically the combat effectiveness of those. So it's just normal evolution, but main fire impact, main long-range fires remain unchanged and will remain critical. By far, the most interesting thing was not that. It was the use of the hypersonic weapons, which changed everything. And
the Oreshkin, the Oreshkin.
Oreshnik, no, Oreshnik was well, Russians were using actually Kinzhal, which is hypersonic weapon, aeroballistic missile, and of course Tram-22 Zircon, which is Mach 10 anti-shipping and land attack missile. It was launched from Crimea by the Bastion complexes. So yeah, that was before Oreshnik, and many people would like to talk about it. Obviously, American propaganda and Western propaganda deliberately trying to silence all things of this nature. They were primarily using Ukrainian propaganda. Pentagon bought or swallowed hook, line, and sinker all those fairy tales from Kiev. Remember the ghost of Kiev? That one was so ridiculous that even there, at some point of time, BBC had to come out and debunk it. But if you look attentively throughout most of the special military operation, Western media, Western pundits, they were using Kiev regime propaganda and US aid propaganda, which was financed, of course. We know now when Trump started to disassemble this establishment, so to speak. So, but reality is, hypersonic weapons made an incredible impact. And then, of course, Oreshnik showed that Europe better be sensible, so, and it could be done without use of the nuclear weapons. And we can say now that in its combat effectiveness, and it's called mightiness, might, that means the impact from the use of those weapons, hypersonic weapons are approaching nuclear weapons. And so that was the real revolution. And apart from other things, which long talk about it. So, but yeah, the West was exposed.
Besides the change in technologies, how do you see the tactics of or even strategies of Russia on the battlefield? Because initially this began as a very as attrition warfare with heavily defended lines by the Ukrainians. So the trenches, the weapon systems, everything in place. Also, the Ukrainians used to have much better soldiers. I think they threw a lot of their best fighters in the Kursk cauldron. But how has the actual the tactics on the battlefield changed? Because now one's starting to see more indications of a bit more maneuver warfare, or again this big arrow offensives. So we see more cauldrons being shaped, larger moves. A lot of cities are now being taken, or villages, towns, without the same kind of structural harm to the buildings. So again, with all these troops being surrounded, or fleeing, how do you interpret this? Are the Russians becoming more confident in terms of making larger offensive, bigger moves, digging deeper into Ukrainian territory?
No, it's not more confident. Russians were always confident about that. And that is the news for some people when you tell them that since the 2022, even when Russians were withdrawing from the Kharkov, no need to, hold to the empty fields, for what, for the PR reason, that they never lost their operational initiative being the ability of the troops to strike on any given operational directions. Russians never lost it. The problem with, of course, when you have especially the Western public, which grew up with all those Hollywood, trash about, Patton, just running through the, Lorraine, and all that. No. The foundation of this is classic World War II, Great Patriotic War, and it is, of course, in the works of probably one of the most consequential strategists of our time, Alexander Svechin, who absolutely rejected for example, Iserson's and other Tukhachevsky idea of the, crushing blow and things of this nature. He said, no, you have to exhaust first. And you have to exhaust to the point that, and then you go in and they are crushed. And this is exactly what happened. Russians, this happened. Many people do not understand. The real special military operation didn't start on the February 24, 2022. It started on the April 3rd, 2022, almost a month and a half after. And the reason for that was when Istanbul negotiations have been sabotaged by the United States by means of this clown Boris Johnson, who basically came in and said, no, we're going to support you. We're going to, just provide everything, including command and control. So the negotiations broke down. This is when Russians realized you cannot negotiate with these people. So, okay, so the war starts. And again, I repeat it many times. I will repeat it again. There is a huge difference between operation, special military operation, and the war. Russians do not fight the war. They fight special military operation. If Russians would have been fighting war, God forbids, first, their civilian casualties would have been much higher, probably order of magnitude higher, and political top of the Kiev regime would be gone, really fast. So, and that's what many people don't understand. So Russians are going there surgically, and they are fighting in the economy of force mode to lower their casualties. Russians obviously do have casualties. They do die. There is no doubt about it. But real kill ratio is astounding. It's about between 1 to 10, 1 to 12. So per one Russian soldier killed, Ukraine loses 10 or 12. At some sectors, sometimes it's even higher. So there were whole battalions of Russians fighting, for example, in the areas around, in Donetsk Oblast, where they had like 300. 300 stands for the wounded. So battalion has like few wounded and not a single KIA. And but in Ukrainian troops are just absolutely demolished. So, and yeah, they will run out of people very soon. Actually, they are running now. You have the 18-year-olds, even a 14-year-old have been caught. And women formations, like companies made out of women. So there you go. That's pretty much tells you everything you need to know.
So the assumption initially was that the war would be ended on the battlefield simply because well, there was no diplomacy, and yeah, nobody wanted to talk. Russia said it considered this an existential threat. The Ukrainians also put a ban on actually negotiating with Russia. The NATO countries also put a boycott on diplomacy. So this looked like it was going to end on the battlefield in quite a gruesome and brutal manner. Then, of course, we have Trump coming along, saying that he's willing to negotiate. I initially was quite pessimistic, but again, he recognized the basic assumptions that is and accusations by Russia that that NATO expansion was the source of this conflict, and he was willing to address this. So this gave some reasons for optimism that we're actually able to discuss now the European security architecture. Some of my optimism has faded a bit since, given that we're not really moving forward. But how do you read this the state of the negotiations? I know there's probably a lot happening behind the curtains which we can't see, but do you have any sense of the direction?
Oh, no, the direction is very simple. And it's like Vladimir Putin, Medvedev, Lavrov are repeating it ad nauseam. Either you remove those conditions which created all that or not, will continue, and this is what is happening. Trump cannot lose this war now. He essentially, and again, it depends on the terms and time frame. It's not his war quite yet, but if he drags his feet, it will become his war. And he understands he cannot subject the United States to this utter geopolitical humiliation. So whatever United States and Russia are discussing now, the only value, so to speak, the only tangible Russia can offer United States right now, the rest of it is not negotiable, really, is there either to provide some bones, so to speak, throw some bones to Trump, like this, remember, ceasefire on energy objects, which, of course, was broken immediately. On the 17th, it expires, and the rest of the energy structure of Ukraine will be demolished. But at least there's some bones, so to speak, to show him that, yeah, we understand your position. We kind of give you this, so it's like fodder. You can feed it into this imbecilic, American media, especially all those establishment, the primarily DNC controlled. And, but the point is that the only tangible which Russia can offer him now is the saving face for the United States. And it will be at the expense of Europe. So he has to play this triangulation. He is playing, of course, against the entrenched globalist forces which are primarily sitting around in Brussels and, London. And so, and situationally in this respect, yeah, we can say that Americans and Russians are supposed to be sort of, allies, if you wish, or partners at least, because in American prestige is on the line, despite the fact that it's already lost the war. But Russians can do this favor and say that, oh, yeah, it's not Trump who lost the war. This was the previous administration. And if he doesn't understand it and doesn't move in that direction, it's going to be, it's always decided on the battlefield. Remember Zhou Enlai in 1954, the premier of China, who stated that, rephrasing famous one-liner from Clausewitz, that war is always the continuation of the politics by other means. So he rephrased it and said that diplomacy is a continuation of the war by other means. And so what we have here is just smoke and mirrors. But reality is it is always driven by the battlefield, always. It's always driven by the battlefield. It's always driven by the real economy and its size, industrial productive economy, which define everything. And we have the result on our hands today.
How do you see the calculations, though, by Moscow? Do you think Russia wants a political settlement, or does it prefer to resolve this on the battlefield to make sure that all its conditions for a post-war settlement could be dictated by Moscow? Because I guess on one hand, I can see why Russia would prefer to get an agreement, especially with the Americans, on the European security architecture. On the other hand, it doesn't look like at least the Europeans will be willing to meet the Russian demands. And I guess, in all fairness, the demands in terms of no NATO, no security guarantees, disarming Ukraine, regime change. It's a bit of a tall order, especially for European politicians who painted themselves a bit in a corner with, telling everyone that we're winning for 3 years and Putin is the new Hitler. It's very difficult to meet any demands at the moment. So how do you see what the calculations are in the Kremlin? Do you think they will they want a settlement, or they will just prefer a military solution?
Oh, Russia can go either way, but the problem with the West is it's not agreement capable. You cannot sign anything with Europeans, period. And what happened dramatically, this is in my 62+ years, and being the Cold Warrior 1.0, professional one at that, I never saw in my life, and I never experienced the intensity of the contempt, if not outright hatred, to the combined West as the military political entity in Russians ever. Even during the Cold War, there was obviously a lot of things, which have been done through the cultural channels. You had this French cinematography and things of this nature, and oh my gosh, so the West, we may be the part of the West, and no. Even before the war, Tsiom, even Levada, which is a foreign agent, no less. So essentially, they are foreign agent. They are financed by the USA and CIA and MI6. But even they couldn't, hide this. In 2021, Russians have been asked if they identify themselves as Europeans. 64% radically not. There were 20 who were ambiguous. Well, guess what now? Russians do not want to have anything in common with Europe, period. It's over. And I've been advocating this for a long time, and now we have those voices, all kinds of voices, of course, but the erecting of the Iron Curtain, because this is the only way you can talk to Europe. Europe is inconsequential. It is not the subject of the international relations. It is an object. Because of its, some people still believe that, if you count those inflated and most of it fictitious numbers of GDP, that Europe somehow is, oh my gosh. Well, reality is it has no resources to be part of the real arms race. It has no resources, and Russians, for the first time in history, they are beginning to live better than Europeans. That is the shocker, for many people. And as such, Europe is absolutely non-agreement capable. Russians understand that the main driving force was United States. And that is why they talk to the United States. I'm not interested in European participation in whatsoever, anyway. So in this case, whatever Russians and Americans decide, however United States wants to, well, Trump calls it MAGA, whatever you call it, however United States wants to preserve its face, and maybe to attempt to restore some kind of the economic sensibility within the United States, which is primarily industrial base. I doubt he will succeed, but you know what, I could be wrong. And Europe is just the material. During Biden administration, those so-called strategists, most of them are people who never saw a real job in their life, never hell. They thought that at some point of time, Europe will be used as the cannon fodder against Russia. But then, of course, Russians are not idiots. They have general staff and extremely well-educated people and officers who do the planning, and they have numbers, real numbers of real economy, real resources. And now when you look attentively at the energy situation, and there's nothing which is happening in civilization without energy, period. There is no industry, no development. Europe has nothing. Unless, of course, the United States wants to sell, which is already doing the 3 times the price, all those, natural gas and oil. And so as a result, we have what we have. Europe is becoming irrelevant, and it will become also much more poorer. It's already happening, especially when you look at Germany. The way, well, France it's a trash country now. Especially for people who go to Paris or Marseille, they are shocked by what they see. So, and this trend will continue. It cannot be reversed because Europeans still will continue to, people run here, constantly say, oh yeah, they voted for AfD, in Germany. So what? But if you put together all those globalist parties from the Christian Democratic Union to whatever the hell they have, they still constitute majority of people. French re-elected Macron with the devastating results for Marine Le Pen. He didn't just win, he trashed her in the polls. So it is, in the end, somebody has to pay, as Russians did in the 1990s. You pay the price. Europeans didn't. So they are now beginning to pay the price. Kremlin clearly understands that. And that is why you see yourself a very noticeable distancing of the Moscow and political elite from Europe. Russians do not want to deal with Europe anymore, period. They have to deal with United States. United States still remains the economic and military superpower, however, less impressive than it was, but still you have to deal with it. There are a lot of nuclear weapons. There are different types of approaches to the security configuration, and especially between nuclear superpowers, which can annihilate the world several times over. So they have to communicate. They have to find modus vivendi. Europe, Russians are opening arms for Europeans, normal Europeans who are traditional values and who value the Christian root of European civilization. But many people missed it. About 3 months ago, I think, maybe 4, Patriarch of Russia, he came out with his speech and stated, oh, we're still European civilization. It's just that Europe today is not Europe anymore. It's so almost, with this famous quip about there will be, 2 Romes. Russia is the third one. I mean, Moscow is the third one, and there will be no the fourth. It's just you're looking at this, my gosh, it kind of correct now, so, and that's what we have. We have the geopolitical shift on such a tectonic scale that I never saw anything like this. I thought collapse of the Soviet Union, which I barely survived, was something special. My gosh, what we have now, it's literally global shakedown. This is what we are witnessing.
I think this is a fact which is also missed often in Europe is how much Russia has shifted away now. I mean, over the past decade, Russia obviously intensified reorganizing its economy and political partnerships more away from Europe and link itself more with the East. But as you mentioned, what the polling shows now, the identity of Russians, that they don't consider themselves European to the same extent anymore. This is something, the Russians spoke about in the 19th century during Dostoevsky, the idea of,
Yeah,
pivoting to the East, with the ungrateful Europeans, as he wrote about. Yeah, no, I used to work as a professor at the Higher School of Economics, Vishka, and yeah, I remember our students, we were all learning Asian languages, either Japanese, Chinese, Korean. It's yeah, really preparing for this new and a new, I guess, post-European world. And I think this is what many people are missing, that once this war is over, this idea that Europe can put all conditions to
yeah.
restore relations with Russia. The idea that Russia doesn't want anything else, anything more to do with Europe, and not only because of the war, but a general contempt. And I think even now you see this from the United States. Of course, J.D. Vance being the embodiment of it, but
And he's
clearly
right.
there's a
JD is
wider
right.
contempt.
Yeah, JD is correct. You know what? United States has a Bill of Rights, okay? Whatever is happening to the United States, it might disintegrate in the end. We don't know. It might happen. And this is, as I already stated many times, is not the power which it used to be, or at least pretended it to be. I mean, there was obviously 70s and the peak of the industrial development, but since then it was constantly rolled down. But there is an American Constitution and Bill of Rights. You just cannot get around it. You may try, but in the end, you have to face the legislative consequences of that. Europe doesn't have it. All these statements about, oh, yeah, we have freedom of speech, absolutely meaningless. They're not supported by any acts of their whatever the legislation. And as a result, look at this. We have what? This is not to say that Marine Le Pen in any way is, she's a globalist as Macron. She is a political animal. She would say and do whatever is needed to get elected. But the point is, yeah, they put her in jail. Look at Georgescu. So Brussels came in. It's becoming 1984. United Kingdom is long ago. It's becoming the third world nation. They are about to lose the last metallurgical plant. And this is the G7 nation without metallurgic industry. How come? How can this be? I mean, it's unbelievable. Oh, they sell derivatives. They're good, so how they go, well, Netherlands obviously counting the prostitution and drug trade as the part of the GDP. So that's what Europe has become. And it's a freak show. And yeah, Russians want what they have now, those freedoms and decent level standard of living, and if not for the wars and, West interference, Russians suddenly recognize the most important thing. We would have been doing even better. So which is, how in the end, it's economic bottom line, and when they go to Paris, or even some Americans, I know Judge Napolitano recently he went to Moscow, he was stunned. And again, it's not just Moscow, it's pretty much every major Russian city. They look like clean, safe, and modern and things of this nature. And people begin to learn about it. Information travels today extremely fast. YouTube, we communicate over the internet. There are old times when you had this pigeon, messenger pigeon, throw and wait for the response several days at least. So are gone. We have the instant communication, and many people talk from the different countries. You look at the discussion boards, or you look at my blog, for example. From all over the world, people, just from Brazil to Europe to, the British guys, French guys, Russian guys, they all communicate, they kind of, discuss things. And this is very important, So, and maybe that is one of the factors which we should not discount that easily, because in the end, there is still a lot of communications going on on the level of the population. But Russians, you're absolutely correct. They do not want to be associated with modern Europe, while retaining, of course, in the cultural outlook is definitely European, no doubt about it.
Yeah, my last question is maybe a very short one. How do you see Russia's willingness to make compromises now? Obviously, the no NATO is written in stone, but when it comes to demilitarizing, Ukraine or regime change? Do you see any? I guess if the Russians would have to make a compromise or could be attracted by, for example, an offer of recreating the European security architecture, where do you think it would be possible? Would it be the territorial, the administrative borders? How do you think? Where do you see possible compromises coming in?
Um, I don't see this type of compromises coming easily. I don't think Russians are ready to talk about it. And do not forget, throughout this special military operation, throughout the three last years, even their objectives, military and political objectives, were changing somewhat. They were evolving, obviously, as things progressed. For example, you don't hear anymore from Vladimir Putin or anybody else from Russia Security Council uttering such a phrase as they are brotherly people. For Russians, they are not. Russians don't like Ukrainians. It's over. All this thing after the atrocities and what they have done, they still, London especially, drive the terrorist activity within Russia. A lot of it is driven through the GUR, which is, of course, Mr. Budanov's intelligence organization of the armed forces of Ukraine. So Russians are keenly aware of that. So when you literally, Europe is behind that, and United States, what kind of the relations you would expect? The Russians don't trust it. So, but I believe there could be some off-ramp, if you wish, politically such that, okay, we agree on some kind of the political compromise now, but it will be such compromise that it will be very temporary until the purely on diplomatic and international law type of the arrangement, there will be inevitably that Ukraine will be completely broken with Kiev and few oblasts around it remaining Ukraine, but eventually that we know that Odessa and Nikolaev will declare independence pretty much the same way as it was done with the Donbas republics. And then, of course, Russians will play it, diplomatically, not to humiliate the United States immediately. And this is the only point today, how United States can avoid outright humiliation. And this is the main thing. That's why Russians and Americans talk to each other. This is because they, as already stated, the only tangible which Russia can give United States right now is the saving face, somewhat saving face. So, and how it will go, I don't know. Obviously, Kremlin knows way better than me. I'm just the, former military guy who look at the configuration of the front line and what is happening there on the operational level. Wars are not won tactically. They're won on operational and strategic levels. And the victory on the operational strategic level have been achieved already. So, and as I say, for the last year or so, it is an arrangement phase. It was clear that at some point of time, Trump would want to talk. Is he genuine, sincere? He is not very good at war, let's put it this way, in the foreign policy. So, but at least he tries to save United States, which he's supposed to. He's the president of the United States, but it is impossible to save the way he wants it to do. It's just absolutely no goal, period. And that is why President of Russia, how many times he has to say, until the root causes are removed, there will be no compromise. And that's the funny thing. And I understand for you as European, it's really not pleasant probably to hear, but Europe, it doesn't matter here. It's about two big dogs, and Europe lost. It lost a lot. I mean, if you think about it, and especially after what they were doing in terms of they became even more insane and unhinged than even the United States. So, and Russians do not want to deal with Europe.
Andrei Martyanov, thank you so much for your time. It's been very interesting to get your perspective. So, yeah, thanks again for your time.